So living the mystical union, some of you may already have an inkling of what this may be about. I'm sure many of you do, and will know that mysticism is becoming of increasing interest in the world. And of course, it links into a lot of quantum physics as well, which often is rather more mystical in its descriptions than many religions seem to be. From people are coming to these ideas and experiences from many different directions. And more importantly, many of you may have experienced something and will know that it is in the mystical union, the culmination and essence of all religions, as the Mahachohan also said, and that includes Christianity. In the mystical experience, it seems the teachings and the stories and the background all start to make sense and come together. And so for me, it is the absolute essence of Theosophy, the ancient wisdom, and all spiritual paths, really. And this coming together of the mystical experience may well be the purpose of the current phase of humanity's spiritual evolution on this planet. And so we might as well get on with it. What is mysticism and what is it like? And Virginia Hansen, in her book Silent Encounter, which I've quoted from a little today, has some definitions which I'm sure you've come across. The mystical experience, a sense of union, of being outside of space and time, a self-forgetfulness and ecstasy, and imperative, undeniable authenticity in relationships, in art, nature, and creativity. These are just sort of words, really, but again, they need to become real. What is it like? And the words that come to mind is that a mystical experience can be an event of the most beautiful love, a sense of oneness with all life and of God, however you understand God to be, or rather experience God to be, I should say. And really utterly beyond words. They try and use words to capture the experience, but it isn't. The experience is something very much beyond those. And such an experience totally transforms the person who now is flooded with love and life. And in that experience, there is the source of a sort of perpetual new life, and the love that must share itself and tries in some way to communicate this wonderful experience to others. Now it is known that there is no separation between God and the creation, or it's translated, depending on the tradition in which the mystic is brought up in, as a oneness in Christ or in Krishna consciousness or nirvana. The divine lives through the person rather than being separate as an experience. So what is going on, and how can we at least slightly understand with our human minds the tool which we usually have to use to make sense of the world? And one of the questions that come up for me with this is, it begs the question, why is there a creation in the first place? Quite a big question that we need to make sense of. And a little exercise may help to illustrate this a bit for fun. If you point your finger at an object in your room and then say to yourself, what is it you'll see? You'll come up with a label, table or a chair or a flower, whatever. And so we define the world by labeling and describing it. And we need comparisons to do this well and usefully. So in a way, we need a duality to make sense of the world. But now point the finger at your own head and now say, what do you see that it is pointing at? Of course, the answer is nothing. You can't see your own head. And so you could say that the creator is a creator of labels and descriptions when it looks outward. But it cannot see anything when it looks back to itself. It can't look back to itself. There's no thing. And so the one, the unity, the no thing, as it looks away from its center, starts to create layers of manifestation that we call our world, which may act as a mirror to help it to understand and to see more about itself. You could say that the creator needs creation as a mirror to know more about itself. And that may be one of the functions of creation. And as we know as humans, there are two main rings of these layers for us in our human experience. The first ring is the personality to the soul. And the second, these are my descriptions, and the second is the soul to the spirit, using the traditional 3 layers of the human constitution. Obviously, there are many other descriptions of that. And as a reminder, the personality is, as I would describe it here, is our physical body, our etheric energy field, our emotions, and the lower mind. And just a reminder for those less familiar with this, although it's probably not the case here, but we often think that this is ourselves. That you may notice that an actor will have to produce real emotion to be convincing, but switch right at will from tenderness to anger and back again. Or we can switch our emotions depending on our perception of the situation. So they're not us truly. They are expressions that we can observe. And similarly with the lower mind, if you sit down to meditate or to study, it is you that decided to sit down to do so, but the mind is almost immediately off thinking of coffee or something else, what our friends are doing. But you decided to meditate, so ask the question, who are you? So that is the first ring, as it were. And from that personality, when you silence the mind, you cross the antakarana, as the Sanskrit term, or the bridge of consciousness to the higher mind, not from the computer mind to the mind of the deeper relationships between everything, basically, of the understanding of creation. It goes deeper into the soul and into the intuition, into the buddhi, and further still to the spirit. And so when our consciousness or focus of awareness leaps from the lower mind to the soul, we notice this big change in our experience. In that silent leap, there's the peace and love and unity of the intuitional worlds, the higher self. But even the higher self can be divided. For simplicity, we often call it part of the higher mind, the intuition, and the lower part of spirit. And even these are reflections or images of a trinity, depending on your tradition, how you describe it, but all manifestation is through trinities. Reflections of trinities in the traditional theosophical terms, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, will be familiar to you. So you can say that man, humanity, in essence, is a reflection or an image of the Creator or God. 3 aspects of different layers, but all necessary for one creation. So when we reach or open ourselves to these higher levels, we may experience direct knowledge of scientific principles. There are many scientists who will quietly admit that their discoveries, their world-shattering Nobel Prize-winning discoveries, were intuitional flashes. Many of you will know that is the case. Einstein was very open about it, others far less so. But nonetheless, many scientists do have that way of discovery. But also, of course, there might be in musical and artistic inspiration, or direct knowing about a situation, or what for us we might need to say or do at any moment in time, and possibly that sense of unity with all life. Nicola Benedetti, the famous violinist, very clearly said in an interview that she tries to let the music flow through her. She's not playing the music, she's allowing it to flow through her. And of course, Elgar was listening to the music when he was walking in the hills, and then wrote them down, that we so famously listen to at our proms, etc. And so in this intuitional world, Buddhic level, it might be called Buddha, Buddhic, Nirvana, Christ consciousness. This is the life manifesting through different forms. In Christian terms, we might say, in him we live and move and have our being. But it is also, another quote, the plane from which the many children will know themselves as one in thee. Now, actually, many of us may well have had these sort of experiences already. Times of inspiration while we're in nature, times of quiet, also times of tragedy and need during a particular religious practice. When we suddenly have a feeling of something greater and higher and deeper and moving and powerful than our usual everyday self. And so actually all of you have probably had the beginnings of mystical experience, and certainly the first ring experiences between personality and soul. That it may not be so rare as we may think. And what is then the key to opening this door? Well, you already know that, and that is largely to quieten the mind. As we know, the lower mind, the computer mind, is perpetually busy. As many traditions say, like Sri Ramakrishna, it likens it to a tree full of chattering monkeys. It's the chattering mind. But as we quieten our mind by focusing our attention on higher planes, and we know that energy follows thought, and that what we pay attention to is for us at that moment our reality. And that's a very important point in the spiritual life. And the analogy I use for this is radio stations, that we don't know they exist until we tune into them. And then we tune into one and then tune out and tune into another. We don't know the first one still exists unless we tune back to it. And the same is hearing our name at a gathering. We have to listen very carefully to the person next to us in a crowd, because otherwise we don't hear what they're saying. But if we hear our name suddenly mentioned, we suddenly switch our attention and we don't hear the person next to us at all. So what is our reality is produced to some extent by what we pay attention to. And that is therefore part of the spiritual life, is to change our focus of attention. And this is part of the reason why those who don't know this think that the spiritual life does not exist and is of no value because they've never tuned into it, and therefore it does not, for them, apparently exist, at least not in ongoing consciousness. And in a way, we come back to the little exercise with the Creator pointing the finger, as it were, and giving it a label. And of course, in quantum physics, the observer has an effect on what is observed, and in a way, sort of creates it. So walking through this quietened mind and open door, we become alert and open to the higher. And you could say the soul light floods in, the higher mind, the higher self floods in. Another analogy for what I'm trying to say, again, probably familiar to you, is the idea of a mountain reflected in a lake. And you could say that the mountain is the Atma Buddhi Manas, the higher mind and the intuitional and the spirit. And reflected in the waters of the lake is the lower mind, immediately at the water line with the higher mind. Deeper still is the intuitional, reflected into the emotions. And the peak, Atma, is reflected into the physical as the physical. And most of the times our lake waters of lower mind are in a storm, and we do not see the higher mountain at all. But when it's quiet, it's a perfect reflection. The mountain is rather nice because it's also often a triangle. And then, of course, you get a six-pointed star and the interlocking triangles of the higher and the lower being the created manifestation. The God, as it were, the perfect image of the divine reflected on earth. And so when we're looking in the spiritual life, all the great teachers will start by quietening the mind, and in life also using the term purification, not by suppression and rejection, but by stilling. A purification can mean a letting go of the personality level distractions. It can mean an integration of opposites. It's so important, I think, so to do, not to reject ourselves or the world, but to integrate our qualities and offer them for the use of the soul. And in that sense, it gives a context for the need to build character and altruism, because in so doing, there is less conflict within one's personality, less ruffling of the waters of the lake. So purification, in a way, is a form of calming the personality, is the first step traditionally in the spiritual life. And then there's the love of one's real self, the God in action as a useful summary. And so, as we know in meditation, the main initial step is to quieten the mind. We know that by repetition, perhaps and the focusing on a simple word or a phrase or one's breathing or some special sentence that we love. But it is primarily a focusing of the mind, but not so much as to offer topics to distract. And as we know, the effort is to sit, to meditate, and to focus. That the experience only comes when the I stops striving for results or goals. It just is quietly but alertly receptive to the higher. It lets go of the me, the self, and relaxes. That is a very important, simple word, actually, that we can be relaxed physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, just allowing everything to flow through us. And as we do so, the next phase unfolds, that we might see or be illuminated, light, knowledge, oneness of life. But the step of illumination goes forward into union. Union is the main mystical state. And it is no longer then an experience, because an experience is still of an individual. And that then becomes retained as a memory. Union then is a state of being. And we can see this journey in the Christian story that is brought before us, as well that we have the latest parts of the story of the letting go of self in what we call in that tradition crucifixion, which immediately and inevitably releases the higher self in what is called resurrection. And there's the life beyond the personality and transcending life and death, as we call it, as we enter the consciousness of the soul. And then as the season has just passed, the soul is absorbed and rises in, or ascends as ascension into the spirit, or the Father in heaven, our highest self within us. And so we reach this higher self within us, the Father in heaven in the Christian tradition. In St. John's Gospel, we have I and my Father are one, as Jesus says. I am in the Father and the Father in me. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. And this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. There's also the beauty of Ruysbroek, the Flemish mystic that some of you will know as an expression of union. He exclaimed that his experience was the following: everything that I have, he taketh. All that he is, he gives. Similar in many ways to the more familiar Buddhist statement, the dewdrop slips into the shining sea. But of course, we also have the next step of the shining sea slipping into the dewdrop. This is no longer union, which implies two becoming one, but identity. Identity as a oneness with Creator. Identity in the Christian tradition as a Christ, the Son of God, but going on to being an identity with a Creator. Again in St. John, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which to me means knowing his essence, who are born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. It's an opening up of the divine within our humanness. And as the source is the unity from which diversity springs, the mystical state begins to identify the source and to tell humanity about this great truth. There's a lovely Zen story that some of you may know. There was the need to choose the next leader of a monastery, and a number of candidates were asked to write some verses anonymously by way of inspiration. And one of the candidates for the leadership of the monastery wrote, "Our body is the Bodhi tree, and our mind the mirror bright. Carefully we wipe them hour by hour, and let no dust alight. Beautiful, true, but he did not become the next leader, because he clearly is still indicating the realm of objects and things and separation. The story goes that a poor boy was there in the monastery too, and a literate boy asked for someone to read the verses to him that were written on the wall. Apparently they wrote it on the wall. And then he dictated his own. Yes, he could not write. And this was his. There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of a mirror bright. Since all is void, where can the dust alight? He had realized the essence of mind and became the next leader. In the Jewish texts, of course, we have Moses asking God his name when he was given the 10 Commandments, and the answer was, I am that I am. Elsewhere, Christ also, before Abraham was, I am. And again, I quote Ruysbroek, the Flemish mystic, a longer quote, but absolutely full of the mystical state experience. When love has carried us above and beyond all things, above the light, into the divine dark, there we are wrought and transformed by the eternal Word, who is the image of the Father. And as the air is penetrated by the sun, thus we receive in idleness of spirit the incomprehensible light enfolding us and penetrating us. We behold that which we are, and we are that which we behold, because our thought, life, and being are uplifted in simplicity and made one with the truth, which is God. A very beautiful description indeed. We know from Zen and some Western mystics and Advaita of references to this dark, as he just did, the abyss, or abyss, the void, the womb, Sophia. And in a sense, it seems to be referring to not anything, but no thing. A no thing, a void that is before things created, the potential and the origin of everything. And again, in the mystical journey in Taoism, touch ultimate emptiness, hold steady and still, is that pursuit of continuing to go forward further and further, not be distracted even by light and love. Hold still to the source. In the mystical journey, changing subject slightly, some Buddhist and Hindu traditions have the idea of rejecting the world, and also in some Gnostic traditions, of entirely rejecting the world as an illusion, which in some ways it is, and as a becoming, and focusing rather on being. But there are risks to that journey, true though it may be. And one of those risks is that the enlightenment gained is not returned to humanity, and humanity and even love perhaps are ignored. But for very many mystics, God, for want of another word, is love, and can only be found by intense love. Of course, the Bhakti tradition in yoga. And you'll be familiar with Nagarjuna, a Buddhist arhat, who taught that it was a better wisdom to choose the Bodhisattva way, very much the Theosophical teaching, the way of compassion. Man attained liberation by forgetting himself in continued service to the needs of his fellow men. And many Christian mystics returned to daily life with their newfound being and worked tirelessly and practically for the betterment of humanity. They connected the source and creation in periods of contemplation and brought those fruits into the activity of helping others to do likewise. For in the mysticism through love, one reaches the source of all love and life, and both naturally want to expand and multiply, for they are inexhaustible. In the Christian tradition, Jesus is asked, what is the first commandment? You'll be familiar with it, with his answers. Thou shalt love thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. And the second commandment, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Again, love being the absolute key word, tool and path. And I should add, or comment really, that loving your neighbor is already difficult enough. Loving yourself, for most of us, is also very difficult. And yet, a key that turns the tap, as it were, the opening between the higher and the lower. For in that loving, there is not the disturbance of the baggage of our daily selves, as it were, that gets in the way of the mystical experience flowing through to this earthly plane. Again, the Christian tradition, Christ saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. It's been used, unfortunately, as a term of exclusivity. But when one interprets that as the life of the Buddhi within each human being that is their true higher self, then of course we have no other route than through our higher self to return to our highest Atma self. There is no other way but through the only channel, and that is a way. It is the truth, and it is the flow of life. And in this way, then, humanity, famously the orphan, through love, returns back to the Father. That is, in fact, the parable of the prodigal son, as Geoffrey Hodson, the Theosophist, also explained. That is the journey of humanity, returning home to its Father. Humanity, creation are expressions of the divine. The physical body of the divine, whatever name you give it, its mirror. And matter is to be divinized, made holy consciously. Thy will on earth be done. Heaven and earth fully connected, especially through humanity, which is the secret of Christ incarnate as humanity. But similarly, the nirvanic experience, the Buddhahood, the Krishna consciousness, whatever labels you want to put on it, humanity is the key, the connection between heaven and earth. the divine consciousness in action. And this is the life and love that we all aim to be a vehicle of and a transmitter of, to be the life of the source incarnate on this earth. And that is all we're asked to do, all we're asked to be. The rest is detail and the adventure on this planet to learn how to do this. And this journey and this opening up may occur unexpectedly. Jacob Boehm, another mystic who was a cobbler, wrote, "For I never desired to know anything of the divine mystery, much less understood the way to seek or find it. I knew nothing of it, as it is the condition of poor laymen in their simplicity. But the gate was opened to me, that in 1/4 of an hour I saw and knew more than if I'd many years been together at the university, and I knew not how it happened to me." It echoes the illiterate Buddhist boy. The mystical experience, the opening of the gate, is not dependent on the intellectual knowledge, which is primarily held by the mind. And indeed, this can be a real hindrance. And as we know, famously, Madame Blavatsky in The Voice of the Silence, saying that the mind can be the slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer. Not necessarily say slay myself, but be aware that it is both a block and a door through which you need to open, but that it is not the place to find answers. And the mystical experience cannot in a way be desired. It's a paradox in many ways. You have to sit in meditation. But then in the desiring, there is a function of the separative ego. The experience of a oneness with all life, and thus a dying of the separative self, happens suddenly when you stop trying. You're just there. And we can prepare for this moment by silencing the mind, such as in meditation, by raising our consciousness in nature, love for the divine, in rituals. We can prepare by trying to live in the eternal now, as Eckhart Tolle obviously describes so often, fully attentive to the current moment, not distracted by the mind full of memories of the past or the projections into the future. As the psalm also says, "Be still and know that I am God." In that moment of eternal now, there is a connection again between heaven and earth. And in that connection then, the activity of the rings of consciousness do not go out of line, so to speak, and they open up and flow and allow the highest to flow through. Often the key is love for the divine, and the divine's love for humanity flooding in return. Then the one becomes the many, so that the many may know themselves as one. This is the dynamic process, a lightning bolt of truth, which is our human journey, and we are all part. So in living the mystical union, we do so perhaps approaching through love, through silence, through living the eternal now, open to allowing the Spirit to live through us as personalities. The source descends, and we are. Thank you.